So just like that, it has been 9 weeks as we end the book of Esther. We will be able to realize and understand that at the end of this story is a celebration. It started with a party, but a different kind of party, and it is going to end with an even bigger party that includes us. It will include us. So, if you are ready, let us turn our Bibles to the last chapters of Esther as we conclude the series of Esther Divine Reversals. The whole series of Esther we have entitled Divine Reversals. It's because time and again we see God reversing the situations of the Jews from someone who is supposed to be exalted as Haman is now impaled on the gallows. And Mordecai, who is supposed to have had his life ended, is now being exalted. Esther, a very simple Jewish girl, is now transformed into the queen of the biggest, largest empire in the then known world. Divine reversals. And God still continues to do that in our lives. How many of us can now look in the mirror and not recognize us because of the work of God in our lives? Divine reversals has happened time and again, and the Bible is filled with stories upon stories of how God divinely reverses ironies upon ironies of things that should not happen but are happening, that you can only attribute to an even bigger, greater God who is sovereign and providential amongst us. We all know that the book of Esther does not mention the name of God. Nowhere is he recognized. And yet, through all this, we see very well God at work, his hand in full control of every happening and occurrence that has transpired in the life of both Mordecai and Esther, our main characters. If there is something that I would like you to remember, is going to be these last chapters. Because this is where the last chapters, starting from the death of Haman, has already shown us how divinely God reverses the situations in our lives for us to reach the end result that God wants us to have. And what is that? God's plan for man is to be in his promised land with clear and great fellowship with him. But with the presence of sin in our lives, that wasn't possible. But God still gave the way. And through all of these things, there is something that God asks us to do. And it is this. I have entitled this conversation today as Forget Me Not. Forget me nots are little blue flowers that are given to someone you love as a sign of him never forgetting an unending, faithful, relentless love. Ang sweet, diba? But God in the Bible also admonishes his people not to forget him, but instead to always remember the things that he has done in our lives, to always recall the goodness, his sovereignty, his full control, how he has brought us to our current situation. What happened before that? What transpired from the beginning of our lives? How he has carefully instigated everything that has been happening to bring us to our current situation in life. And you know, the scripture is a testament of God's revelation to us of things that we should not forget. Alzheimer's is one of the most devastating and painful illness, syndrome, or whatever you call it, that may befall a senior citizen. My grandfather, we'd like to think, had Alzheimer's. That normal things that you do when you have Alzheimer's start to wane. You don't recall the people that you love anymore. You don't recall even swallowing or breathing. because something in the brain happens. We were laughing about my grandfather's illness. We would laugh and have jokes about it. One eventful day, everybody was there. We usually go there in my grandparents' home on Sundays. And that morning, he came out of his room shouting and looking for my tita who's a doctor. Nasan si Mimi? Nasan si Mimi? Lolo, what happened? Why? Why are you screaming? Nalunod ko yung suklay ko. I swallowed my comb. Why? Because early in the morning when he wakes up, he would always comb his hair. And he couldn't find his comb, so he thought he swallowed it. We would always laugh about it until that last day with him when he plunged into the stairs, falling into injuries that would cost his death. We later on realized it was because people with Alzheimer's would go into their routine. So we think that early in the morning, he went to the toilet, went to the stairs, seeing the lights, he turns it off, thinking that that was his room. He fell down the stairs. Alzheimer's is a very painful disease, is a very painful illness. And we, as God's people, have that. We have spiritual Alzheimer's. That is why God admonishes us, forget me not. Forget not what God has done in your lives. Forget not who God is, and forget not who you are in God. Forget me not is the title of our conversation in the last 2 chapters of Esther, continuing from last week's. And the Bible is full of remembrances, of admonishing so that we will remember. God has instituted things so that we will be able to commemorate and remember. Look at this. In Exodus, when God's people were about to exit into the promised land, Moses admonished the people, commemorate this day. Remember, do not forget that this is the day that you came out of Egypt, that you came out of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it. Even from that time, God was already putting in signs and symbols for us to be able to remember, for them to be able to remember. So what does he say? Eat nothing containing yeast. So this is the feast of the unleavened bread. Or recognizing the Jubilee year in Deuteronomy, where he says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and the Lord your God redeemed you. That's why this is my command to you today. On the 7th year, all the slaves are released. An instrument for us to be able to remember that once you were slaves, but now you are free. And Deuteronomy again reminds us and gives us this warning. Be careful. Do not forget the Lord your God. Why? Because failing to observe His commands, His laws and decrees, you are prone to forget. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build houses and you're settling down, when you earn a lot of money, your tendency is to forget because you become comfortable and God has no position in your situation. There's no need for God when you're happy and joyful and everything is calm and comfortable. There's no room for that. Even God said that you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. That is why always put commemorative symbols, commemorative signs. That's why we love using our calendars. We celebrate birthdays so we don't forget. We celebrate anniversaries and mark it in our calendars so that we don't forget. We take pictures, right? Pictures of our child's first footsteps, our child's first haircut. We always put things so that we will be able to commemorate and remember. Because man's naturalness is to forget. Remembering takes an effort, especially if you go advanced in years. And what do we need to remember very, very well? It is this, that God ends our story in victory. That whatever situation you have, whatever trial, whatever tests, whatever pandemic that may come our way, at the end of all this, mga kapatid, always remember and bear in mind that God in His sovereignty and in His providence will end our story in victory. Actually, we are already in a victorious mode because Jesus has already won the victory. Let's proceed with our story. Esther chapter 9, starting with verse 20. We all know that the battle has been done. The edict of Haman has already been instituted. Mordecai now realizes, I need to record this. The battle has been won. The Jews has won over their enemies. Deliverance has happened. There is victory, and we need to write this down because people have a tendency to forget. So he said, Mordecai recorded these events. The second edict that Mordecai wrote gave the Jews the right to be able to defend themselves against the enemies. And they were able to win them over. Deliverance for the Jews happened. They were victorious. So Mordecai said, let's write another edict. And this time, we will write an edict for people to remember how we won and how the fight ended, how the battle ended. So he wrote a letter, an edict, to all the Jews throughout the land, the provinces, all of 127 provinces that King Xerxes ruled over, to celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. These are the 2 days when they went into battle. Outside of Susa, they battled for a day, but inside the city, they battled for 2 days. And Mordecai said, let's have a public holiday. Diba? We have Independence Day. I think every country that has found its independence have an Independence Day. And we too have. In the US, it's the 4th of July. And that's a big feast. And this is what Mordecai is saying. Let's celebrate it annually, the 14th and the 15th day of Adar, so that there will be a commemoration, that we will be able to talk about it as what is written in Joshua. Because when Joshua was crossing the Jordan, God told Joshua, get the 12 tribes, get a representative from among the 12 tribes. Read this later when you go home because it's a very nice story. Get a representative from the 12 tribes who were crossing the Jordan there. And get 12 rocks from the Jordan River, from the middle of Jordan, where the Ark of the Covenant was then seated at that time. He said, get rocks from there and collect those rocks and bring them to your camp. And after that, build those rocks. For what? Because people who are going to pass by the bank of the Jordan will see and ask, what are those rocks about? They are a commemoration of how God has delivered us from the Egyptians and how God has given us the freedom. And Mordecai, as God has given the wisdom to Joshua to tell him, do this in commemoration to remember the deliverance and the victory that God has given you. It's the same thing that God gave Mordecai, telling him, okay, let's write an edict. Let's have a holiday to commemorate the events that we, as the Jewish people, went through in the battle that of the edict that Haman has given. Why? Because it is now a time of the Jews' relief. It is a peaceful event that after the battle and the trial that has been won over, every battle that we go through with God ends in peace and victory and relief. That is what they are going to be celebrating. The Jews were given relief. The Jews are given victory. The Jews are given deliverance. From whom? From their enemies. Every victory every deliverance that God brings us to is a moment of celebration. That's why there are so many feasts and the holidays. Because every time God proves victorious in our life should be a day of celebration. He wrote the edict so that the Jews may observe the days as feasting and joy and giving presents. So they shared their joy and celebration to everyone around them. And they did not only observe it. You know what the Jews did? They agreed to continue. So the celebration was not anything out of obligation, but they knew because Mordecai started writing about what transpired, every detail. Mordecai wrote to them and told them, this is what happened. Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, was the one, the enemy of the Jews, plotted against the Jews, destroyed them. And what you know what we did? We cast the pur. The poor is like the dice. Parang ngayon, you know, poor came from the word, is the translation for lot. Parang a game of chance. Kaya siguro ngayon, loto. 'Di ba? Because it's a game of chance. And this is what Mordecai is saying. You know what happened? Haman placed our life, our future, in a game of chance. It was by luck that Haman chose to determine our ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, they devised a plan against, when Haman plotted against the Jews, do you know what happened? That luck turned around. Because instead of the Jews being killed and destroyed, it was Haman and his sons who were impaled on the poles. The detail of the story was written in that edict because during that time, not all stories, can you imagine 127 provinces? I showed you the map last time and saw how huge and how big the land mass that King Xerxes was ruling over. There was no internet. There's no social media to post what happened. So it is very important for them to be able to realize and understand, why is this celebration needed? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to celebrate? It's because of this, that Haman placed our hands in the game of chance. But even that was controlled by the sovereign and providence of God. That game of chance was not a game of chance at all. Because paano naman, di ba, he chose a day that is supposed to be the luckiest day to kill, destroy, and annihilate the Jews. How can the destruction of people bring luck? If Haman thought that it was a lucky day, it was not a lucky day at all. Because to God, there is no such thing as chance. Therefore, this is very important because one of the purposes why Esther is written is because the Jews would like to know the origin of Purim, which is the celebration of that day when Haman failed in the edict that he placed to chance alone. Therefore, these days were called Purim. Everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took upon themselves to establish this custom. They were establishing a sign, a commemoration, a symbol, so that they will be able to brought to remembrance. They needed to remember. And the story was being given in detail so that they will have a clearer understanding of what it is they are commemorating. In the beginning, when we were new here, to us, when we'd attend the National Day on August 9, for us, it was just a time of beautiful fireworks. When we were new, beautiful fireworks and the display of everything beautiful that Singapore has. But staying on for the longer time, you get that sense of, hey, this is what this country is all about. And remembering and commemorating it gives us even more meaning. And that's what is happening here. Purim was being explained as to why we need to celebrate it. What is that big deal about a day when chance was given? You know how Purim is celebrated? It's celebrated like a mix of Halloween and Christmas. People dress up like Esther's or Mordecai's or Haman's. And during that time, they all gather and go to the synagogue, and the book of Esther is read. And you know what's nice about it? Every time the name of Haman is mentioned, people would cheer and jeer, "Curse be Haman!" And every time the name of Mordecai is mentioned, they all clap their hands and cheer in jubilant and tell them, "Blessed be Mordecai!" But you know what? The celebration has changed a lot from that time of the original. Now, this is a time when the Jews are allowed to drink. So since everybody is drunk, they interchange it. Sometimes they curse Mordecai and bless Haman instead. Right? And add to that, they give out, remember the edict, what the celebration, what the edict was saying? That aside from celebrating them within themselves, they would give out goodies, right? And this is what the goodie is. Hamanstaken. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but they are cooked triangular cookies that represents either Haman's hat or Haman's ears. And that's part of their symbol. Why were they given symbols? Why do they need to celebrate this? Why do they need to wear costumes? To be able to remember. This day should be remembered and observed in every generation. And do you know that up until today, more than 2,000 years later, from the time that it happened, Purim is still celebrated. So that we will be able to brought into remembrance that that day that Haman placed our life on a by chance, on luck, it did not happen. Now, as Joshua was given the symbol of the rocks so that they will be able to tell the next generations of God's deliverance to his people, the same is happening. In the book of Esther, when Mordecai wrote the edict, telling his people, ikwento nyo sa next generation, read it, read the book of Esther, and savor with joy and gladness how God has delivered his people into victory. God will always end our story in victory because he is a victorious God. And he wants to bring us there. And these days, Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among its descendants. And you know what Queen Esther did? She also wrote a different edict in support of Purim. Maybe Mordecai wrote his edict in his point of view, and Queen Esther wrote her edict from her point of view, how this simple, young Jewish girl was propelled into a position of such authority, being the queen of the largest, the biggest empire in the then known world. He wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent the letters to all the Jews. An announcement was given in 127 provinces and cities. Celebrate Purim. Why? Because God has delivered us. God has proven us victorious. And that is something to be celebrated. The Edict of Esther also established the days of Purim, designated as times that Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed that every Jew from that generation to now will establish that they are descendants no longer during the times of fasting, or sorrow, but now a time of jubilant celebration. Esther supported the decree of Mordecai. Purim is celebrating not the chance, but the one who orchestrated the whole thing. It was not Haman. Even how the dice fell was orchestrated by God. Purim was not placed upon the chance. That's why it was named after Pur. But what the Jews are saying is that no, even that chance of luck was overturned, was divinely reversed by God. That is why we have and we can celebrate today. What Haman thought was based on chance was actually divinely designed. Its celebration says that even if this day was held by the roll of the dice, God was in control to bring about his purpose. What Haman thought was being determined by rolling of the pur, is now a celebration that God is sovereignly in control over the affairs of man. There is nothing left to chance as far as our lives are concerned. That's why we are brought to remembrance. Remember, commemorate, celebrate. Because God, in His sovereignty, divinely reverses everything so that He may bring victory to our story. Galing, di ba? For a book that does not mention God at all, don't you see God's hand at work? So when there are times in your lives when you feel that God is not around, that He's distant, that He seems so far away, be patient. He is at work bringing you to the victory that He has designed for us. Let's finish the story. Esther chapter 10 is a very short chapter, 3 verses, but has such meaning and importance. What happened? After the celebration of Purim, after the edict was pronounced, it was business as usual in the palace. King Xerxes imposes new taxes to be able to tax his people. Everybody was happy, and when you're happy, you're more productive, right? So they're happy, so they produce a lot. So taxes are in place. Yayaman ulit si Xerxes. The whole kingdom was going to be so rich. King Xerxes imposed a new tribute. That's the tax throughout the empire to its distant shores. All of 127 provinces, may bagong tax. Diba? Because the kingdom needed to prosper. It cannot be party all the time. And all his acts and power, King Xerxes was asserting his power. Maybe he was seeing that the Jews were starting to be very powerful. So he said, I am great. I am powerful. I am still the king, but not without one thing. Mordecai was now being propelled to greatness. The king has promoted him from being what he used to do to now being really the second in command in the kingdom. And he was being acknowledged. Every edict that he came up with was passed. Every proposal that he gave was happening. And everything was starting to be good. So seeing this, Mordecai was promoted by the king. And this is written in history books. And look, he was recognized as a Jew. Remember, in the beginning, they couldn't announce that they were God followers and God believers. As a matter of fact, they needed to deny it. But this time around, he was being recognized. Mordecai the Jew. Mordecai the Jew is now second in rank to King Xerxes. Preeminent among the Jews. That means he is first among the Jews. So siya yung may pinakamataas na posisyon among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. He was such a great politician because he was working for his people. And that is what a great leader has to do. But look at this. Do you see that word that I've highlighted aside from Mordecai the Jew? Preeminent. Where did we hear that word previously? Who is that word attributed to? And what does preeminent mean? Define muna natin. Preeminent means the head, the beginning, the firstborn. Do we now all the more realize who is the other one who is mentioned to be preeminent? Colossians chapter 1 verses 15 to 18 read this. The Son, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things was created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before, preeminent, all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head, preeminent, of the body, the church. He is the beginning, preeminent, and the firstborn, preeminent from among the dead, so that everything he might have the supremacy. Who is the text talking about? The Son, Jesus Christ. In a book that does not mention God, in a book that does not recognize God, he is surely being foreshadowed. That Mordecai's preeminence among the Jews, there is one who is even going to be coming, who is even more preeminent, who is going to rule over us, who is going to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Mordecai was only second in rank to the king, but Jesus, the Son, is the same rank as the Father. And he is preeminent among us. For a book that does not mention God, he surely is present in everyone, foreshadowing the presence of our firstborn King, Jesus Christ the Lord. Amen? Wonderful that God's promise of victory has already been designed. The ultimate deliverer is going to come and has come. The book of Esther foreshadows that Mordecai's preeminence and him being used as the deliverer is actually just a symbol and a sign for them to be able to commemorate. But there's someone greater, even better. The ultimate deliverer was being promised to them and has come for us. The Son, the image of the invisible God, that he might have supremacy, sovereignty, providence over everything. I hope you can understand now why I have said that our God will end our story in victory. The last enemy to be defeated, they say, is death. But even that, Jesus has conquered. There is no more enemy that is so big that will prove God to be not victorious. At the end, our story will bring us to that great victory. So mga kapatid, remember, every little step of deliverance in our lives, let us choose to remember, to remember. Let us remember to remember. Because our naturalness, ang ating pong naturalesa ay makalimot. Kahit po bata ka, we forget the work of God in our lives. We forget His goodness and His faithfulness. We forget. We have been warned that we are a forgetful people. So remembering takes effort. It takes attention. Write down on your notepad. Write down on your calendar. Natatandaan ko ang mami ko dati, yung sa likod ng kalendaryo, di ba yung may mga buwan? Hindi yung buwan na months, buwan na moon. Sulat niya lahat, magkano ginastos ko ngayong araw na to, pamalengke, baon ni Barry, baon ni Burley. But everything is written there, and at the end of the month, she would summarize that. Mga kapatid, we are prone to spiritual Alzheimer's. And truth be told, as you grow old, promise, nakakalimot kayo, mag-aabot-abot din tayo, sabi nga ni Pastor Joey. It's true. Symbols were given to the Jews and the Israelites to help them remember. Let us help ourselves to remember. Let us put in our mind to remember and choose to remember. Let us always remember to remember the goodness of God's victories in our lives. Going out from the house, reaching the office safely, that's a victory. Being able to complete your schoolwork at the day, passing your exams, getting a good job offer, that's a victory. Getting COVID and recovering, that's a victory. You have food on your table when there are millions, even billions of people who are not able to eat. Mga kapatid, the end of the book of Esther brings us to remember that God ends our story in victory.